So this is a class that I did about 8 years ago. So I'm very confident no one will remember. I've changed a few slides and whatnot, but with the current events that we've seen going on in Israel from the October 7th attacks and whatnot, I thought it might be a good little review for us. And you know, the world's kind of asking questions about whose land is it. So we'll address whose land it is. We'll take a look at Jerusalem. You know, how important is Jerusalem to the Arabs? You know, they claim that it's very important. So we'll take a look at that, and we'll take a look at some of the historic peace deals that have been been put in place. Today we hear a lot of we got to get back to that two-state solution. So we'll take a little bit of a look at that as well. We'll see how far we get. So here we see that Jerusalem, God said, will be a burdensome stone for all people, right? All roads of conflict lead to Jerusalem. And while three major religions claim it, we're going to see whose it is. But before we get too much into that, I want to discuss just a few of these verses here in Revelation chapter 16. It's kind of a strange set of verses here, but I found a very good commentary. I think it was I'm not even sure where I got it from, but I think it was in one of my Bibles. But it says, I saw three unclean spirits like frogs come out of the mouths of the dragon, the beast, the false prophet, for they are the spirits of devils, working miracles, which go forth unto the kings of the earth, of the whole world, to gather them to the battle of the great day of God Almighty. So we know this. We're not going to get too deep into this. This is a separate class at some time, but those three unclean spirits are the cry of the French Revolution, right? Liberty, equality, and fraternity, right? But now I want to focus on the next two verses, right? Because then it's like Jesus interrupts this revelation, and he says, listen, behold, I come as a thief. Blessed is he that watcheth and keepeth his garments, lest he walk naked and they see his shame. And then he goes on, he talks about Armageddon, right? So Christ interjects, right? We get the cry of humanism, then Christ says, I'm coming, and then it's Armageddon. We know that's the order of events. Christ comes, there's the resurrection, there's the judgment, then it's Armageddon. Even though today we look and we see the nations lining up accordingly to what Armageddon is, but it's not yet. Christ comes before them. So here's the commentary. The commentator says, the imagery suggests the deceptive propaganda that will, in the last days, this is our time, lead people to accept and support the cause of evil. Spirits of demons or madness affect all people, even kings of the world. All buy into the propaganda that leads to support the evil. And this mindset will be prevalent in the world when Christ returns, and it will lead the nations to Armageddon. So, we, in our country, we're pretty divided, left, right. And it seems to be, they keep going further left and further right, Democrat, Republican. There's a big chasm almost in the middle. And, you watch the news and you really, we got to try to weed out the bias. You want to watch CNN? Well, you're going to get some anti-Israel stuff. They're pretty far left. If you're far right, well, then you watch the Fox News, right? And you kind of got to weed through a lot of the bias, right? Because propaganda works, and the media will push forward whatever their agenda might be. So it can be deceptive. That's what propaganda is. Propaganda has always been very successful. So we have things like fake news. We have, if you scream it loud enough and often enough, whatever your agenda is, it becomes truth. We know today there is no absolute truth. So, of course, that, we say, oh, there is absolute truth. But the world says, no, it's my truth, right? Go, tell them your truth, right? It's all about the individual. It's humanism has just exploded onto the scene. So, we got to be careful when we're watching what's coming across the news, and while we're not pacifists, right? We will fight one day when our commander-in-chief tells us to. But today we turn the other cheek. We're against the violence. So while we don't support, the things that go on in the world, there's plenty of violence all over the place. However, when it affects Bible prophecy, then we have an interest. We feel bad for the Ukrainian people that get attacked, but yet, we've been waiting for Russia to make their grand move. And of course, anything that takes place with God's people, that has an interest to us prophetically as well. Anytime we move down that prophetic timeline to speed up the return of Christ, the one who can bring actual peace, that we can get excited about. Okay, so let's talk about Israel, right? What do the scriptures say about Israel, about his people, about the land? This is what Israel tells Moses to say to Pharaoh. Israel is my son. Thou art a holy people unto the Lord thy God. The Lord thy God hath chosen thee to be a special people unto himself, above all people that are on the face of the earth. He chose Israel. They're special to him. And boy, what would the world say to this? I've chosen you above all people. What about equality? All right, this is politically incorrect today, but this is what God says. No, you're my special people. You mess with his people, all right? He who touches Israel touches the apple of my eye. You poke somebody in the eye, you better get ready for a violent reaction. No one wants to be poked in the eye. It's automatic. And so God says, I got my eye on my people. God will correct them in measure, but you better not mess with them. And while those three religions of the world claim Jerusalem, well, God has already claimed it. Jerusalem, the city which I have chosen to put my name there. The Lord said, in Jerusalem I will put my name. In Jerusalem, which I have chosen out of the 12 tribes of Israel, I will put my name forever. God associates his name with the city of Jerusalem. And he's going to be the protector of Jerusalem. Like birds hovering overhead, the Lord Almighty will shield Jerusalem. He'll shield it and deliver it. He will pass over it and will rescue it. I will defend this city and save it for my sake and for the sake of David, my servant. God's the one who defends it, right? Israel today, well, they're pretty secular, and they think it's the Iron Dome. How could they not see God was defending the city in the 6-day war? 6-day war? What did God do on the 7th day? Yeah, he rested, right? How could they not see this? But it was their great generals and their air force, they claim. So it's God that looks after Jerusalem. So it's very important to God. So this is about the land. This is the promise, the covenant that God made with Abram. In the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, unto thy seed have I given this land, from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates. Right? And then he lists all the people here that were in the land. There are no Palestinians in here, are there? There are no Arab nations in here. All these people, you don't run into them anymore. We don't run into Amorites, Canaanites. They've been centuries long gone. And I will give it unto thee, later he says, I will give it unto thee, thy seed after thee, the land where you are a stranger, the land of Canaan. It was the land of Canaan, and it became the land of Israel. It's going to be for an everlasting possession. That's the covenant. And then Abraham says, but what about my son Ishmael? I love him. And God says, yeah, I know. And I will surely bless him, and I will make him fruitful, and will greatly increase his numbers. He will be the father of 12 rulers, and I'll make him a great nation. The Arab nations, right, they come from Ishmael. And then the very next verse, God reiterates, but the covenant that I make, that's with Isaac. What covenant? The promise of the land as a possession forever. That's with Isaac. Now it's time to take the land. Right? We're into Joshua now. And he says, go in, take the land which I've given you. So in Joshua it says, so Joshua subdued the whole region, including the hill country, the Negev, the western foothills, the mountain slopes, together with all their kings. He left no survivors. He totally destroyed all who breathed, just as the Lord God of Israel had commanded. And then Joshua, this didn't happen overnight. It took a while, and then Joshua gets a little bit old, and God says to him, there's still some land remaining that needs to be conquered. The regions of the Philistines. So some Palestinians will claim that our ancestry goes back to the Philistines. See, there's Gaza, right on there. It's the same location as it is today, and that was our land. Now, they share no ancestry with the Philistines. They do share land, right? They lived in the same area. And they do share some characteristics that are similar to the Philistines. And that is a deep hatred of Israel. And I don't know if we'll get there today, but maybe next time we'll take a look at a few other characteristics that they share with the Philistines. So it's that whole land that God had promised them. God then says, as for all the inhabitants of the mountain regions of Lebanon, to a place that I can't pronounce, God says, I myself will drive them out before the Israelites. And he says this, he says, be sure to allocate this land, all the land of Canaan, to Israel for an inheritance, as I have instructed you. So whose land is it? Well, it's God's land. He is the creator, and he can do with it as he pleases. It doesn't matter what man says. Oh, we were here, you can't kick us out. It's God's land. He'll give it to who he wants. He is the potter. We are the clay. He can do with mankind as he wishes. And he has told Israel, remove those people, it's your land. And that's who he has given it to. So we'll just step back a little bit and we'll take a look at the blessings and the cursings, right? This is the scattering of Israel. Before they go into the land, God tells them, he gives them those blessings if you follow me, and these are the curses that'll be upon you when you don't. And it shall come to pass that as the Lord rejoiced over you to do good and to multiply you, so the Lord will rejoice over you to destroy you and to bring you to nothing. You shall be plucked from the land to which you go as to possess it, and the Lord shall scatter thee among all people, from one end of the earth to the other. My God has cast them away because, just as he told them, you didn't hearken unto me. They shall be wanderers among the nations. But again, he was always going to bring them back. Thus saith the Lord God, although I have cast them far off among the nations and scattered them among the countries, I will gather you from the countries where you have been scattered, and I will give to you the land of Israel. It's God's to give. He's given it to Israel. And there's a lot of other passages, of course, that speak of the scattering and speak of the regathering. But we already know this. So speaking of the dispersion, this man Harry Millman, a church historian, wrote The History of the Jews in 1830. He said the political existence of the Jewish nation was annihilated it was never again recognized as one of the states or kingdoms of the world. He's writing in 1830, right? And that was true. From AD 70 and onward, there was no nation of Israel. Completely gone. Until, of course, 1948. The state of Israel is reborn. And what a miracle it was, right? But, though the scriptures are quite clear that God will scatter and God will regather his people, quite clear, there were many skeptics. This is Martin Luther, right, a Catholic priest. He was a bit anti-Semitic. But he says they've been cast out, dispersed, utterly rejected for almost 1,500 years by virtue of their own merits. They still hope to return there again, but there is no such promise with which they could console themselves other than what their imaginations smuggle into the scriptures. Again, the scriptures are quite clear. But when you don't want to see something, you don't want to see it. All right, the facts and prophecies prove that natural Jews will never again be a chosen, regathered people. Look at the date, 1946. They had just waited a little bit longer. You know who the Watchtower Society is? Jehovah's Witnesses, right? That's when they had to retract, right? And Martin Luther, again, in 1543, these persons must be informed that the kingdom of Israel was led into captivity and destroyed. It never returned home, and it never will. Again, Martin Luther, he skipped a lot of verses in the Bible to come up with that conclusion. But John Thomas knew, right? The pre-adventural colonization of Palestine will be on purely political principles, right? It wasn't like, hey, we got to have, this is what God promised us. It was opportunity, right? They wanted to escape all the anti-Semitism in the world, and they had an opportunity to have their own nation. Pretty accurate, right? I mean, he wrote that in 1849. He even has, the British power will play, a heavy role in this. And it wasn't just Christadelphians, this Bishop Thomas Newton. He explains it even better. He goes, you see the Jews led away into captivity into all nations, and Jerusalem trodden down of the Gentiles, and likely to continue so until the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled. As the Jews are a constant miracle, preserved a distinct people for the completion of the other prophecies relating to them. Right? God has a purpose with the Jew. And the preservation of the Jews is really one of the most signal, illustrious acts of divine providence. The fact that there is a nation again is probably the greatest miracle that we can look to and witness and see. It wasn't, and now it is again, just as the Word of God promised it would be. Well, what about the Muslim claim to the land? We see a lot of protests, right? I wasn't surprised to see the protests, pro-Palestinian protests, of course, in Arab countries, even in Europe, but in America? Boy, there was a lot, right? College campuses and an uproar. And they, sang the song, "From the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free." And, there was a few politicians who got themselves into a little trouble, a few leaders who said, what? It means what? Yeah, it means get rid of the Jews. From the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. They want to be free of Jews. That's what it means. And they said, no, it's just freedom and equality. That's what it means. This is what river to the sea means. Keep not thy silence, O God. Hold not thy peace, and be not still, O God, for lo, thine enemies make a tumult. They that hate thee have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and consulted against the hidden ones. They have said, come, let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. For they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee. I mean, that's like the mission statement of Hamas, Iran. You've got to be removed. And this was just a little cartoon, pretty clever, right? We know, all that land the Arabs own, and it's, Israel's just this tiny, tiny little piece of land. And here's Israel saying, but we gave you land for peace. Yeah, we want that peace. We want it all. You can't live here. You got to get out. So there were 4 major wars where the Arab nations tried to remove Israel from the land. Of course, the War of Independence in 1948, I think David Ben-Gurion, when it was announced, hey, we are a nation again, and the people were dancing in the street, and David Ben-Gurion said, tomorrow there will be blood. And that's what happened. But they won. The Suez Crisis in 56, the Six-Day War in 67, and the surprise attack in Yom Kippur in 1973. They tried to remove, and it all failed, right? God has said, I will plant you. I'll pluck you up. I'll remove you. But one day I'll plant you, and no one will pluck you up. They're not going to get out of there. So this is some quotes from some historians about the land of Israel or Palestine when it was under Arab rule. It says, between the Arab conquests of the 7th century and the beginning of the Jewish return in the 1880s, Palestine was laid waste. Its ancient canal and irrigation system were destroyed, and the wondrous fertility of which the Bible spoke vanished into desert and desolation. Right? It was just a wasteland. And this is a pretty popular, Mark Twain on his visits in 1867 said, you can ride for 10 miles and you don't see 10 men. The solitude makes one dreary. Galilee has become a rusty mound of barrenness. Bethany and Bethlehem, in their poverty and humiliation, have nothing about them now to remind one that they once knew the high honor of the Savior's presence. Right? So it was just a wasteland under Arab rule. What about the city of Jerusalem, right? This French writer in 1850 said, ruins everywhere. Everywhere the odors of grave, the holy city of 3 religions is rotting away from boredom, desertion, neglect. Again, Jerusalem under Muslim rule. In World War I, the British reached out to some of the Arab tribes and said, help us get rid of the Ottomans. And if you do, we'll give you independence and we'll give you some land. And they agreed, and they were very helpful. And when the negotiations came, this is what one of the British negotiators says. He says, there was no place south of Damascus to which the Arabs placed any vital importance. The idea of, we got to have Jerusalem, it never came up. They used to refer to that land, the land of Israel, as southern Syria. Okay, so even when they had the opportunity to negotiate for land, they didn't want Jerusalem. Yasser Arafat, though, things kind of change after the Six-Day War. Yasser Arafat, right, we know who he is, leader of the PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization. They want to liberate Palestine, again, from the Jews. He says, Jerusalem, it's the innermost of our feeling. The feeling of our people and the feelings of all Arabs, Muslims, and Christians in the whole world. He doesn't mention the Jews. Saudi Prince Abdullah, Jerusalem, it's just like the holy city of Mecca. Mecca's, I think it's number 1. Mecca, Medina, those are the places, not Jerusalem. As this geographer wrote, centuries ago, he says, Mecca is holy to the Muslims and Jerusalem to the Jews. Here are some facts about Jerusalem. It's mentioned 963 times in the Bible and 0 times in the Quran. The Jews pray facing Jerusalem. The Muslims pray with their backs to it. Israel was a nation with Jerusalem as its capital for about 2,000 years before there was any such religion as Islam. Even when occupied by Jordan for almost 20 years, no Muslim leader visited. You know, they had an opportunity to make Jerusalem their capital, but they didn't. It was mostly ignored. So then we get into a little bit of the peace plan. So this Peel Commission, there was an officer, British officer named Peel, and you know he was in the area, and an Arab revolt happened. The Arabs were like, listen, there's way too many Jews coming in. They used to get along. And then, again, the late 1880s, more and more Jews started to return to the land, and then it became a problem. And the Arab revolt happened, and the Peel guy goes back to Britain, and he says, listen, the Arabs are revolting. They don't want the Jews there. They're both fighting back and forth, and they want us out of there. We really need a two-state solution. So they came up with one. And as you can see here, I don't know what color this is because I'm colorblind. Pink. Thank you. Is she lying to me? I wouldn't put it past her. This is all the Arab land they said to have, right? Is it fair? This is for the Jews. It didn't seem to be fair, though this was mostly wasteland down here at the time. But quickly, Israel says, yes, give us anything. I think one of the quotes was, give us land as big as a napkin, we'll make it work. They quickly say yes. In Jerusalem, by the way, they didn't know what to do with it, so that was going to remain under British mandate. And immediately the Arabs said no. So then we had, you're going to be a nation. It gets approved. It was a tight vote in 1947 to approve them as their nation. Harry Truman was the president, and he was pretty influential in making it happen. There were some votes that he needed to turn around. It was two small nations. I forget who they were, but he went and turned their vote by promising them loans and whatnot. And this is the land that this was the Jews would get this wasteland and up here and whatnot. And again, quickly the Jews said, yes. International city, by the way, for Jerusalem still would belong. It would belong to everyone or no one. And the Arabs again said no, and then they attacked. This is just a little side note of Truman. I said, he was pretty influential in bringing him back. He swayed a couple of votes to go that way. He also, and it was a tough decision. He would get swayed back and forth whether to support them or not. His counsel would tell him, you better not. You're gonna really get the Arab countries upset. We need the oil. And then some of his counselors were Jewish, and they'd say, no, listen, this is the right thing to do. Remember the Holocaust? We're just out of the Holocaust, right? Mankind was embarrassed by what man can do to man. And so they were sympathizing with the Jews. And then, one of his counselors said, do you want to be reelected? Because if you support Israel, you're not going to get reelected. And we know how important reelection is. They'll say anything to get reelected. It's all about getting reelected. So he was in a tight spot. But again, he decided he would. As soon as David Ben-Gurion announced, we are a nation, in 1948, it took Truman, he was the first leader to respond. It took him 11 minutes to say, I recognize them as a nation. Do you know how long it took the papacy to recognize Israel as a nation? 48 years. We'll discuss that later. And in a meeting in 1949, Truman met with the chief rabbi of Israel, told him, God put you in your mother's womb so you would be the instrument to bring about Israel's rebirth after 2,000 years. On hearing these words, Truman arose from his chair with great emotion, tears in his eyes, and he asked the Arab rabbi if his actions in helping the Jews were indeed interpreted as the hand of the Almighty. What would we say to that, brothers and sisters? Yeah, we would agree with that, wouldn't we? God removes kings and sets up kings for his purpose. Did he want to bring Israel back in a nation? Sure. Were the angels there whispering to Truman when he was confused, didn't know which way to go? I think we would agree. So 1947, this is the the proposed cutoff here, and then the war breaks out. Well, Israel gains a bit more territory up here. The West Bank is annexed by Jordan, and Gaza is controlled by Egypt. And, they had told, in the 48, they told the Arabs living in the land, we're gonna wipe out Israel. So why don't you just leave and then come back? And so a lot of the Arabs living in there left. They went to Jordan. They went, I think, to Lebanon as well. And of course, they never were able to go back because Israel won. Now, why didn't their Arab brothers just use the West Bank and say, this is your new state? They kept them as refugees. They wouldn't allow them to mingle into their nation. Just as we see today, when the people of Gaza, the Palestinians, are told to flee, right? And what happened? Egypt shut the borders. Jordan shut, no, you're not coming in here. And of course, the 6-Day War, right? This is what it was before. Look at all the territory. Boy, they gained a lot of territory. Israel, they got the West Bank back. They got the Sinai. They eventually work out a deal with Egypt, land for peace. And they sought to give up more. They were willing to give up even more land. But the Arabs didn't want to meet with them. So the Arab League met later in 1967. Of course, they blamed the defeat on the U.S., Britain. You guys were helping them. That's the only way they could have won. And they came up with the 3 no's of this Arab League meeting. No peace with Israel. There'll be no negotiations with Israel. And there'll be no recognition of Israel. So, do they really want peace? Do they want to live together? Or do they just want to get rid of the Jews? This is what a brother of ours wrote. I think it was in the Christadelphian in 1955. This is good Bible study. Because Jerusalem must be possessed by the Jews prior to Christ's returns, so that he might manifest himself to them as their deliverer and savior, the ejection of the Hashemite Jordan from there is a foregone conclusion. Right? Remember, they took control of it. Jordan took control of Jerusalem. And here is his brother saying, well, that's got to end somehow. Right? We're not always given all the details. Sometimes we're given the end. Don't know all the details how it's going to go. But this guy writes, no, they've got to be out of there. So what do? We look for, then, developments which will result in Israel getting possession of the whole city. And for a dreadful conflagration, fire kindled by that spark throughout the Middle East, right? As we read in Zechariah, Jerusalem's going to be a burdensome stone for all who mess with it. So, that's some good Bible study. This is something we've known for a long time. They will take it. It's the end of the times of the Gentiles with that war in 1967. So I think, we'll continue on. So the Oslo Accord, 1993, takes place in Washington, D.C. Yitzhak Rabin from Israel, of course, Mr. Clinton, and Yasser Arafat. The deal is, Israel will withdraw from the West Bank and Gaza, and the PLO will recognize Israel as a nation. These 2 men win the Nobel Peace Prize. But the people reacted. The extremists on both sides react. Hamas is like, we don't want negotiations with Israel. So they increase suicide bombings in Jerusalem. And Rabin is assassinated by a Jewish extremist who he doesn't want them to make any deals of giving up land. And the whole deal, it ends up going nowhere. So this man, Yasser Arafat, Nobel Peace Prize winner, many of you might remember, 72 Olympics, the Munich massacre, where 11 Israeli Olympians are killed. He sends in 8 Palestinian terrorists. They go into West Germany. West Germany at the time, Israel complained, hey, there isn't a lot of security here. And West Germany's like, listen, we're looking to change our image after, the whole World War II thing. So we don't want a bunch of security around. And these guys waltz in, they go into the rooms where the Palestinian Olympians are, the wrestling team, and a struggle ensues, and they kill 2, and they take the other 9 hostages. And this is the Olympics, and it's televised, right? Maybe you remember that's a pretty iconic picture, right? This was all, right? I was only 5, so I don't really remember it, but maybe some of you remember watching it live, right? It was broadcast all over the place. And Israel contacts Germany and says, we're going to send our special ops. We know how to deal with these people. And Germany was like, no, we'll be humiliated. We don't need help. We'll take care of it. And they end up botching the whole thing. And the remaining 9 hostages die. Germany kills 5, I think, of the 8. 3 are captured, put in prison. And, the world heard them. The world was terrorized. They wanted freedom of 200 plus Israeli prisoners. And Golda Meir said, we do not negotiate with terrorists. So just a few months later, maybe you'll remember the Lufthansa hijacking. They demand the release of these 3 terrorists of the Munich massacre. And quickly, West Germany, and quietly, they agree. And they send them off, and they land the plane in Libya, where they receive a hero's welcome. And, there was all sorts of rumors. Quickly, Israel was quite upset, and so were some of the other nations. What are you doing, Germany? And rumors started to happen that Germany had come up with this whole plan because they didn't know how to deal with this type of terrorism, and they just wanted it to go away. And they thought if they appeased the terrorists, well, there would be no more hijackings and things of that nature. And so there's been ongoing, which I didn't know until recently, that even last year, they're still negotiating the family survivors with West Germany. And West Germany has offered them $5 million per family. And yet, the families rejected it. And their lawyers are saying, we get so much information that this was all concocted by West Germany because they just wanted to get rid of the problem. So their leader, as we said, was Yasser Arafat. This is Yasser Arafat going before the UN.
لقد جئتكم يا سيادة الرئيس بغصن الزيتون في يدي وببندقية الثائر في يدي فلا تسقط الغصن الأخضر من يدي لا تسقط الغصن الأخضر من يدي
لا تسقط الغصن الأخضر من يدي
لا تسقط الغصن الأخضر من يدي.
In November 1974, Yasser Arafat received a standing ovation at the General Assembly of the United Nations. he had spoken of a peaceful solution to Palestinian demands for a homeland. For the guerrilla leader, standing among statesmen, it was a crowning achievement.
So that was the Nobel Peace Prize winning Yasser Arafat.
History is full of those who thought
Who threatens the UN 2 years after that Olympic massacre, and he gets a standing ovation from the people. I'm just going to play one more little video, then I'll stop. So this guy, this Ask Project, I've watched a lot of videos. He goes around, and this is like a year ago, 2 years ago. And he goes around, he asks Palestinians, hot topic questions. He goes around, asks Israelis some hot topic questions. And this is one where he's asking Palestinians, name some important Palestinians in history.
Name an important Palestinian in history.
سمي لنا شخص مهم من التاريخ الفلسطيني. شخصية مهمة من التاريخ الفلسطيني.
يعني ياسر عرفات.
غيره.
يعني رمزنا راح يضل رمزنا.
غير ياسر عرفات.
غير ياسر عرفات.
Other than ياسر عرفات.
يعني مليان شخصيات مش جميع نتذكر.
There's a lot of important people, but I can't remember everybody.
خلينا على ياسر عرفات.
Let's stick to ياسر عرفات.
Anyone in ancient history before 1900?
هل في أي شخصية مهمة
A famous Palestinian.
قبل 1900؟ هل في شخصية مهمة فلسطينية قبل 1900؟
1900 لا صراحة بعد 1900 لا يعني
I don't-
القدام موجود هو بس يعني
I'm sure there is, of course there is, but I can't remember.
Name someone important in Palestinian history.
ممكن تسمي لي شخصية مهمة من التاريخ الفلسطيني؟
أبو عمار.
في حدا ثاني؟ أبو عمار.
Okay. From ancient history?
في أي حدا قبل أبو عمار؟
كان؟ لا قبل أبو عمار ما بنعرف حدا.
We don't know anybody before أبو عمار.
ليلى غنام، دكتورة ليلى غنام.
ليلى غنام.
دكتورة
The
ليلى غنام.
governorate of the Ramadan Dafira.
Okay. Ancient history.
هل في حدا من التاريخ الفلسطيني مثلا قبل 1900؟ قبل العام 1900 ممكن تجاوب حتى لو مش على الكاميرا. تعرف؟ No, we don't know.
No. Okay. Name an important Palestinian in history.
Bad.
Okay, for time's sake, I'll stop there. But it goes on, and Yasser Arafat's the number one answer by far. Yasser Arafat is known as the father of modern terrorism. Plenty of hijackings, embassy attacks. He bombed a Jewish school, killing 21 children in 1974. He's got quite a resume to back up that title of father of modern day terrorism. And, so he's an important person because they view him as a freedom fighter. The other name, this guy keeps asking them, no, go back in ancient history. Go back 500 years. And they're all like, we don't remember. Because there was no ancient Palestinians. They were Arabs. So the number two answer was the Mufti of Jerusalem back in World War II, and he was a friend of the Nazis and collaborated with them. So, we'll continue this next week with some of these historic peace deals. And is it about peace? Is it about getting peace? Is it about if we just had our land and their land, we could all live together? Or is it just about hatred of the Jew?